So, hi, Christopher. How are you today?
I'm doing just fine. How are you doing, Lay?
I'm doing just fine too. So, we both are in a very similar kind of area, but from a different angle. You work with ADHD for people who have gained weight and can't seem to lose it. And I work with ADHD couples who are struggling because the ADHD causes some issues.
Hmm.
So, what kind of questions do you have for me? And let's just have a nice conversation and talk about our different perspectives on ADHD.
Absolutely. And I think this is potentially going to be a really interesting conversation because in my line of work, oftentimes there are extraneous things that can affect people's ability to lose weight. And sometimes that is their home life, their relationships. And also I realize that's not my forte either. So I'm really interested to hear your perspective and just kind of see how we cross over here with these things.
Well, I can tell you, and I think you probably know this from personal experience, anytime a person is in a close relationship with an ADHD person, even if that person has ADHD also, it becomes really frustrating at times trying to deal with it because, as you know, ADHD does not manifest in the same way in every person. It's kind of individual for everybody. And
Yeah.
because it's a spectrum, all of us are on the spectrum somewhere. Just some of us are more on the spectrum and some of us are less. But it's still, it affects people in all sorts of different ways. But the number one that I've seen is just frustration.
Mm.
Comments like, are you listening to me? Do you hear me? Um, why can't you just whatever? You know, and the point is that they maybe can or maybe can't. There are ways of adjusting a person's way of thinking so that they can be more open to being able to communicate in different ways.
I will agree with that 100% because of my own experience in relationships. I've had at least two partners that I know for sure have ADHD, and my experience, especially when there's a conflict or if there's just an ongoing conversation that we're trying to get clarity about, some of the frustration can be that one person says one thing and it doesn't land with the other person, but it's important. Like the person who says the statement that this is really important to me, it is really important to them, and then when they voice that, maybe it doesn't land with the other person, and then later on when it's brought up, it's, well, why didn't you remember that? And it's almost like two people can be talking across each other rather than meeting in the middle.
Or not communicating that somebody says that and it stops in the middle and it doesn't get to the other person, and that happens all the time, all the time.
Right. Right. Yeah. So in my experience, that has led to a lot of frustration of, well, why don't they hear me? Why don't they understand me?
Yes.
And then, and there's a way too where I think two people can go away from that conversation feeling like they were heard and feeling like they were understood, and then come to find out later the other person may not even remember the thing that was said in the conversation that was so important to the other person, which leads to even more frustration and more breakdown.
Yes. Yes. And so the question is, how do we do this, and how does it affect the person? Obviously something happens so that they react in a way that, for whatever reason, it becomes a physical ailment, and that's where you come in also.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, definitely. Well, yeah, and so I'm curious, just for my part, when you have two people like that in relationship, and a point is being made, and there's potential for the other person not to fully get it, or to understand it. Um, like, what are some strategies to really move through that? Because I know on my end, it feels like. If there's something important to me, I've shouted it from the rooftops, and I'm standing on a chair like saying, hey, 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 like this is really important. And if it doesn't land, then it's like, well, I don't know what else to do. What do I do?
And that's a good question, because you can't be sure that you're going to make it land anytime. It just, ADHD is not something where it's there all the time and you can deal with it in this way. There will be times when the other person hears, and there will be times when the other person hears and it doesn't connect. That whatever pathway it's going through in the brain, it doesn't go from one place to another. There's just these disconnects. And it doesn't mean they're not, this is crucial to understand. It doesn't mean they're not listening. It doesn't mean they don't care. It doesn't mean, obviously, you don't love me. What it means is that their brain didn't connect. And that's all it means. And the main part of it is whether one partner has it or both partners have it, is just to understand that this is not something that they're trying to do to you. Don't take it personally.
I think that's a really important point, because I know just in my experience, when there is that miscommunication, it can oftentimes go through a pathway in the brain that is very traumatized, and it can be triggering. And so almost in a way that the other person becomes a manifestation of those triggers, and it has the potential of shutting down communication even more. You know what I mean? So in those instances, it's like, how can you sort of open up while feeling triggered and reconnect with that person that you love while feeling like I'm traumatized in a way?
But what I've found is the best way to just to step back from it. Take your person out of the situation and then just breathe. One breath, maybe more, depends. Just take yourself out of the situation and then look at it from a different perspective that is not, obviously you're trying to hurt me, or you're just trying to be that way, or it's, no, that's not that at all. It's just step back and look at the situation, and then you can move forward dealing with it. It's a lot like, and this is one I use a lot, meditation or yoga. In meditation, a lot of times what you do when you come to any situation that is triggering or whatever, it's an unpleasant situation, is before you react, you take that split second to just stop, wait a minute, and then decide how you're going forward.
Yeah. I'm hearing mindfulness. That's a practice that I use a lot with the people that I work with, is just cultivating those skills to just kind of step back for a moment out of the trigger and bring your full reasoning capacity into that moment as much as possible. And it's not always easy. It's not always easy, especially when that part of the brain seems to kind of go out the window a lot of times, which can be an issue for people with ADHD. And that could be, one of the manifestations of, at least in my world, why it can be a struggle to lose weight, because you lose sort of that prefrontal cortex part of your brain that can say, hey, let me just be aware of what's happening.
Are your people then eating to handle the pain? Is that correct?
It's very individual and it's all across the board. But I would say if there is sort of a deeper emotional wound, comfort eating can soothe that for a lot of people, or people have found a way to self-medicate with food. And really, to some degree, what that's coming from is there's dopamine dysregulation in the brain. That's all it is. They're like their reward chemicals are imbalanced, and food is a really quick way to kind of get that quick dopamine hit. And so, you know, with somebody who's trying to lose weight, what we look at are things like that. You know, when you're feeling triggered, what are the things that you typically do? So it could be food, it could be sugary food, especially, or it could be carbohydrate food. Those are the two big ones. And one of the things that we found with people with ADHD is that their brains typically process glucose slower. So that means that their brain is getting less fuel source, and that will oftentimes cause them to reach for sugary snacks or, you know, carbohydrate heavy foods, just to get more in their system so that their brain can receive that in a larger amount and so that they can actually feel normal.
So should they be eating like small snacks all throughout the day frequently?
It's really tricky. That's a really good question. So that would be one way. And that is a strategy that I use with some of my clients. Now, that will give them glucose. It will help them regulate their dopamine in their brain and help them feel normal. The issue for some people is the quality of the food that they're doing that with.
Mm-hmm.
So again, it's like if your natural instinct is to eat sugar and carbohydrates to regulate yourself, and that's what you're eating in all of these small meals, then that's gonna be harder for you to lose weight that way.
And I know a lot of people are going to think, well, that doesn't make any sense. ADHD people are just like, they're moving all the time. How can they possibly be overweight? How can they possibly be having these issues?
That's a really good question too. So, and maybe an explanation of how ADHD is categorized, because there used to be ADHD and ADD. And as of 2013, with the DSM-5, you know, recategorization of you know, some of these definitions, ADD was absorbed into ADHD. So you can think of ADD as sort of a subset of ADHD. So ADHD comes in three forms, according to the DSM-5. So there's hyperactive impulsive, and that would be the people that are just moving around a bunch and, you know, just acting impulsively. But not everybody is like that who has ADHD. There's also the kind where that I fall into, which is called inattentive ADHD. And these are the types that typically zone out, or they're dreamy or distant. And then there's a combination of the two, of inattentive and hyperactive impulsive. So I think it's really important to really know what you're working with in terms of which category you fall into. So yeah, there's a way to say, you know, if you have ADHD, you're moving around a bunch and you're probably burning a lot of those calories, which could be true to a certain extent. But there again, like if you're eating so much food that's heavy in sugar and heavy in carbs, there's only so much of that nervous energy that's going to burn that off.
Thank you for that. By the way, I'm number 3.
You're number 3. I'm number 3 as well. And I think there is a huge disservice doing to that specific section of people, because one of the stats I work with is that Dr. Adler, who's one of the premier adult ADHD specialists right now, he estimates that about 75% of adults who have ADHD don't know it. And I think that's a huge part of it, because we think of ADHD as somebody who's bouncing off the walls, or like that kid in class who just can't sit still. And that was never me. I was the kid in class that was like looking out the window and daydreaming, and the teacher would be talking directly to me. And I bet they had a sense that I was tuned into everything that they were saying, but it was like in one ear and out the other. And now I made really good grades all the way through school. And just looking back on that, I've always had ADD, or ADHD as it's categorized now. But my skill was I would take my books home and I would study like crazy. So it didn't matter what the teacher was delivering in the classroom. I would do my own work separately and come back and I would do really well on my grades. So I think it's really hard to find those students sometimes and to help them and to give them a proper diagnosis.
And not just to do all of that, but also to continue to treat them as a normal person, as just another person with a little bit of a difference, instead
Yeah.
of taking, oh, you're going to be over here in this group and we're going to separate you out.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's really big. So I had another question in there somewhere, and it just see, and this is what happened. So let me just explain, and maybe this would be good for anybody who might listen to this. Like, even though my brain is engaged in this conversation, throughout the conversation, there might be 10 sticking points in my brain that says, oh, that's a cool thing to follow, or that's a cool thing to follow. And the minute that I start to follow that, I've lost where I am in the conversation. And going back to what you were talking about before, I think that can happen in relationships too, and in miscommunications. And at the same time, it's the thing that my brain latched onto was so juicy in that moment that it's almost like I have to put a guidepost right there and keep checking in on it, because if I don't come back to it, then it feels like my head is going to explode.
Absolutely. That's how I
Oh
made it
yeah.
through school, as guidepost, guidepost, guidepost.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I don't know how many times. Uh, I'm thinking of one time in particular. I was sitting at a table with one of my spiritual teachers, just having a conversation, and my brain was going in 20 different places, and I wasn't following what she was saying. And she had to just stop, and she said, "Pay attention." I was like, and I was like, oh, but in my head, like, the conversation she was having was so boring to me, but like there's so many little things along the way that were so much more interesting that I wanted to follow, that I clocked out, I zoned out. But that's my inattentive ADHD.
Yeah, in school, I was, well, they listed me as gifted as well as ADHD, dysgraphic, um, um, this, give me the word, you know what I'm talking about. Uh,
Dyslexic, dysgraphic, and yeah.
uh, there, prime example, ADHD, right there. Anyway, they listed me as just gifted, because they, at that point in time, they didn't have the rest of these things, but they did say I was gifted, and I made it through school with very high marks. I remember one time when I was in college, where I'm sitting in class, and it's very close to the end of the class, and the teacher asks a question, and I don't even remember what the question was. Um, but he wanted each of us to say what we had thought about this particular question. And he started, and he could see my brain just going wild and processing and such. And I was just like, I gotta speak now. I gotta speak now. And of course, I couldn't say that. I'm just like, and I'm literally bouncing in my chair. And he's got this smirk on his face, and he's calling on everybody around me, but not me. And he keeps calling on everybody and everybody until it's 1 minute until the end of the class. And he says, now you. And I just, and everything came out. If that's not typical ADHD, I don't know what is.
Yeah, I mean that
Bouncing was me trying to hold on to that the whole thought, for this whole time, as he's going through everybody else, and I'm holding on, holding on, holding on. That's exactly how it is.
that sounds very accurate to me. I know, like, when I was in school, my currency in school was to make good grades and to have the right answers.
Mhm.
If I raised my hand and had the right answer, like, that was instant dopamine hit, and I just felt so good about that. And so I really prided myself on that. I remember one time I was in American history class, and it was something that I was really interested in. And our teacher was giving a lecture, and he started, and then my brain skipped ahead, like way ahead. And I was in my own world for like 10 minutes or so. And then he stopped. And then I raised my hand and I said, well, what about this, and this? And I was like, oh, I'm going to get that dopamine hit, you know? And he just looked at me, And he goes, yeah, we just talked about that. It's like, uh-oh. Oh no. And then just embarrassment from that. I was like, oh no. And I found that there was a way that, like, because getting good grades and having the right answer was my currency, I never allowed myself to fully zone out in that way, even though that's where my brain was. And so it was this constant battle of, like, I could feel myself drifting off, and I strangleholded my brain into just focusing so hard all of the time. And I just thought that that's what people did. I thought that that was normal. Um, and I had a lot of success going through school and through college. And what I realized was, when I was in my graduate work, after my first year, I had done that for so long, and there were a lot of stressors that had kind of built up in my system that I hit a burnout that was so severe. I was out of commission for about 3 years. And I think part of it had to do with that fact. Like, I had tried to stranglehold myself into this ideal image of who I thought I was, who I needed to be, that I never allowed myself to just be who I truly was. And I couldn't do it anymore. And
Yeah,
for people with ADHD, burnout can be a really big issue.
it's why I never got my PhD. I only got my master's.
Really?
Mhm.
Wow.
I
So
couldn't, I just couldn't, I could not fathom, stomach or whatever, the thought of going to school another single day. I just couldn't. And
so
I had all the references and I had the place to go and I had everything in place. I just couldn't do it.
oh. So was that, then you were already in burnout, or you felt yourself about to go into that and just you couldn't do it?
The very last day, when I was getting my master's and such, I went home from school that day and I looked at the comic section in the newspaper, and I could not fathom the depth of Garfield. I knew I had
Garfield
an
the
issue.
cat?
Garfield the cat, yeah. I could not fathom the depth of that. I knew there was an issue.
Wow. I'm really curious about, like, could you say a little bit more about that? Because I'm really fascinated by how that unfolded.
I could see the cartoon. I could see the cat. I could read the words. They just did not make any sense at all. It was like the words were just flying around, and there I just couldn't. They weren't. They wouldn't go in. I could
Yeah.
not make them stop long enough to go in.
Wow. Wow. So that was a sign that, like, it's a good idea not to go any further.
Yeah. I mean, I've been used to reading huge, nasty texts, like, like nobody's business. The critical theory since the beginning of Plato, lovely stuff like that. And I could not fathom Garfield.
I just heard your chickens in the back.
They're agreeing.
You might hear my dog in the back agreeing too. Wow. So that's interesting to me. So, like, you were able to conceptualize and digest all of this really heady type of literature.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I have a wonderful, wonderful background in multicultural literature, which means I've studied, all sorts of peoples from different ways and how they work in a different way, possibly divergent way, but they still work as people.
Mm-hmm.
So learning, and because my original schoolwork was in education, I understood that there are these different things that they called them learning styles back then. They didn't have these other names, but they became what is today ADHD, dyslexia, and all of the others.
Hmm. Yeah, I remember going through school and even through some of my education courses. We learned about some different learning styles. There was kinesthetic, auditory, visual, and those kind of things. I've been aware of that for some time. And then once I got into the classroom as a teacher, um, just getting this thick binder of all of the individualized plans for students. And it really just blew my mind because I went into my teaching career thinking like, oh, I've got it all figured out. It's that simple. I just have to present this one piece of information so that people can get it visually, auditory, and kinesthetically. That's it. And then
Good luck with that.
good luck with that. That did not, that worked for about 5 minutes.
Yeah, I taught too. I taught English at the college level, and all I had to do was teach them how to write a paper.
Hmm.
Yeah, right. It wasn't that simple.
What did you notice as an English teacher? Like, could you just tell by their writing that they had different learning styles? Was it apparent?
I didn't even have to go that far. One of the things that's probably a little more specific to me, I grew up in an extremely rough background. I can remember at the age of 5 uh, that I had to avoid being hit or hurt or anything else. I had to be able to be invisible, and I had to be able to, at the drop of a hat, in a millisecond, be able to read people's emotional state. And
Okay.
so for me, meeting my students, I didn't meet them looking at the pictures of who they are. I don't get that when I first meet a person. The first thing I get is, what is your energy field like right now?
Hmm.
And frequently I will look at the same person later and I'm like, that's not the same person, because
Hmm.
they don't look the same to me.
Hmm.
But that might be just me because of my background.
That's really interesting. I also have a background in energy reading and energy healing. And just to hear you talk about, um, well, the way I perceived what you said was sort of like you can disappear. Like it's easy to disappear. It's easy to kind of go away from something. And it can be based in trauma. And I've really been thinking through that lately about people specifically with inattentive ADHD, if there can be a link between early trauma where they didn't feel safe. And the safest thing for them to do was to either go somewhere else in their mind or to physically try to get away from whatever was happening,
Or both.
or both. Yeah.
I had a very specific dark corner that I went to, and just I hid behind something and went into my world.
Yeah. Ooh. Well, yeah. Ooh. That's landing with me. That's definitely been a home note for me as well. And I think also just the well, I'll speak for myself. The healing path going forward from that, I've had to work a lot on my grounding and just being fully here. And also there's an element, there's like a throat chakra thing too for me. Like being able to say exactly how I'm feeling or what my truth is, especially in a timely manner, and especially to the people that need to hear it. So that's I mean I've felt there's been an imbalance in root chakra and throat chakra through that experience.
Oh yeah, definitely. And it's hard to work your way out of that. It's a little bit easier if you have support. If you have no support, it's challenging. It's really challenging. And if
Mm.
you're in a relationship and you're trying to do this, and as well as work on the relationship and the issues that are there because of your challenges,
Mhm.
this can be overwhelming and
Abs-
extremely frustrating.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, yeah, because you mentioned support. And I think just intuitively, I've always tried to do things by myself because, going back to those times when I didn't feel safe, um, I wasn't going to other people for support. I was retreating into myself. And so now at this stage of life, it's like, well, that's unsustainable. And I need to have community. I need to have people that I can go to, that I can trust and that can help me. But man, that is just a tangly ball of twine to try to unravel. It can be. I mean, it's something I'm still learning.
Me too.
And I think, I can't say this is a blanket statement, but I think a lot of people with inattentive ADHD struggle with community.
Yeah. I always felt all of my life, I felt like I was swimming across the ocean alone.
Oh, wow. Okay, so can I share this with you? It's an experience I had in a past life regression,
Go ahead.
and this went. So my intention was to go to the trauma, and I was in a very ancient past life, and the images that I was receiving was I had community. I knew my place in that community, and I felt very secure and supported. And one day I was walking, I was away from the community, pretty far out, and I turned to look, and the island that I was on, that the community was on, had exploded. It had erupted. All of my people had vanished in a blink of an eye, and I was stranded now on the mainland, by myself, no community, no one to turn to, and it was very, very painful. Um, and I'm getting chills just saying this, but um, that seems to be a theme for me to heal in this lifetime. It's like, how do I create community? How do I how do I move forward when it feels like, um, that place where I felt so secure and stable is no longer there?
And how do you now, because you're not there, ask for help?
Ooh, yeah, that's a really good question. And in some ways, the thing that comes up for me is I don't know. Like, there's a huge question mark. I don't know. I don't know how, because I have lived my life in such a way that I have prided myself on being able to do everything by myself.
And
But
I live my life not by choice, having to do everything by myself. I raised my brothers from the time I was 10, um, and they were younger than I was. How do you then ask for help? You've
and
always had to do it alone.
well, and especially when you're in a state of burnout where you don't even feel resourced within yourself to take that next step. You don't even feel capable to take care of yourself. And you don't feel like you have people in your life that can help you with that. It's like, well, what do you do? Um, and yeah, I mean, that has been a big question for me in my life. It's like, how do you do that? Um, and I think what I've come to is you just you just ask. You just so I'll explain a little bit more. So in that past life regression, so it was after the island had exploded and I was by myself. What it felt like to me was, I can't survive this way. I can't make it out here in the wilderness by myself. I just can't do it. um, I have to find other people. I have to find other villages and other tribes. And I have to just open myself and be vulnerable and just say, hey, can you can you adopt me? Can we I'll live on the outskirts of your village. I'll do healing work. I'll be your shaman or whatever. but like, can we, can we like work something out here?
Which is, I mean, what you're talking about, and it does flow over into current times and the way that we work with people. For me to be able to do it, and I think this is common for most of us, especially if you have a partner who is also ADHD and you don't feel like they can support you. I built this mask of strength,
Yeah.
and people see me as extremely confident. Not a, no, no, no. But that's the mask that I had to use to be able to get there, to be able to move into life, to through life, to address people and, talk to them. And I mean, I was in business management for 20 years. How do you do that when you have no sense of community, no sense of belonging, no sense of yourself? It was all a mask.
Wow. I mean, is that the only thing that you were running on, was a mask?
A mask, a whole lot of energy, and extreme intelligence.
Which apparently can get you pretty far.
It
But
works.
well, and again, so I think that is something that a lot of people who are neurodivergent have adopted. They have tried to mask, they have tried to put on this facade so that they can fit in and have some sense of normalcy, while under the surface it's like, this world is not made for me and I don't belong here. And honestly, like, that piece right there, masking for so long to such a severe degree, like, that was where my breakdown was happening. That's
And
the thing.
that's
That's
kind
what.
of what happened to me when we get to be about this age. And all of a sudden, the mask doesn't work anymore. You need community, and it was given to me in a really definite event that happened.
Mhm.
But it's like, that mask can be no more. You must go out there and you must find yourself and you must be yourself. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of times when I wish that maybe I could have done that a lot younger. I know I couldn't have, but there a lot of what I'm hoping to do in the world now is help people who are ADHD. In my case, in a couple situation, in your case, working through um, issues for overweight, is to help them deal with these things sooner so they don't have to go through what I have been through, what you have been through.
Yeah. Well, what do you think is the key to that? Because I know for me, my breakdown happened when I was 27, and I also would have liked to have had more awareness and to be able to work through that earlier. Um, and I would say, probably, if we compared ages, I would say, were we about the same age, or was I younger?
Uh, I grew up in the 60s.
Okay. Okay. I think, for, and this is what I've seen more and more and more and more lately, is there has been more awareness on, like, through social media, through the way that parents are talking to their children, and the way maybe that educators are being informed, that we can sort of have these conversations earlier and encourage authenticity and individuality.
I also think this is part of the changes going on in the world right now. The world that we were in then was very much regimented and boxed, and you fit in a box. Well, we round pegs don't fit in boxes.
Mm-mm.
And and but now they have seen, and people are seeing, and the world is changing, and the energy in the world is changing, and it's getting to be where people can be accepted for who they are,
Mhm.
And you know, as I watch the people who are raising kids now, I mean, not everybody's different, but I see a lot more people raising their children as individuals, just
Mhm.
individuals, and being supportive of the individual that they are. They're not trying to put them in a box. Um, I know that both my sons and my granddaughter are also round pegs that don't fit in boxes.
Mhm.
And I was very cognizant of making sure that they didn't feel like they ever had to. And yet at the same time, I was still being, you know, I had been forced into that culture at a young age, and I was still trying to work through and get out of it. So the whole thing that we're going through now is a healing journey, but not just individually, collectively also.
Absolutely. Yeah, I feel that too. And I think, I think, well, my partner, she has two children that are neurodivergent, and she is living that model with them to help them find out who they are as individuals, and to like really consciously trying to help them not mask.
Mhm.
And I like the fact that there's more acceptance these days about people that are round pegs, um, and are even further than that, that they're celebrated for that.
Yes.
I think that that's a big issue, which I like to see, because I think if we don't have that acceptance and celebration, you know, as parents raising children, it can be easy to say, okay, well, I've helped you not to mask and to find your individuality, but now like go out into the world that doesn't support what I've helped you discover about yourself.
But it's learning. The world is moving in that direction very, very quickly. I mean,
Yeah,
I love living in this time and watching the changes going on, even though I understand that there are two sides to this, and there is a side that is causing an awfully lot of pain and an awfully lot of suffering that's going to be carried on for generations. I understand that. But to see the changes coming, and I truly believe that what's going on in the world right now is that those who are still in their square boxes are seeing these round pegs, and it scares the heck out of them. And they're fighting
absolutely.
tooth and nail to keep their little squares and boxes. And the round pegs are coming in and saying, no, no, we're round pegs and we're not going to fit in your boxes anymore.
I've seen that so much, and I've felt that so much, like that trigger, like, oh my gosh, things are changing, and I can't let go of the control of that. But also underneath that, what I've seen is there are a lot of round peg people who who are feeling triggered, who their identity is so wrapped up in being a square peg. Does that make any sense?
Absolutely.
So to let go of that identity and to really drop into your own individuality is really scary for a lot of people.
Mhm.
It has been for me. You know, it's been a healing journey for me to discover these things about myself, probably over the last 11 years, really, since my breakdown, and just figure out like, okay, well, you know, this path that I thought I was going to go down and was so regimented and structured, wow, that was not at all in alignment with who I truly am. and
Yeah.
and and trying to create a life that actually is in alignment with me.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is such a great conversation.
And I think we've actually covered the questions, not necessarily in the traditional way, but why would we do that?
Why would we do that?
That's the thing about ADHD, and one of the great benefits that I've seen in a lot of ADHD people is this a very different kind of creativity.
Mhm.
It's it's there. It's not necessarily how the box people think creativity should be, and it may not be creating what box people think they should be creating,
Yeah,
but the it's undeniably there, and it's very creative, and it's part of what is helping change the world.
absolutely. Yeah. So I really appreciate and value the way that you're stepping into your work and the way that you're helping people. Um, I think the world needs more of that, you know. So I'm really excited to hear how this journey for you is unfolding and just all the people that you're helping in this way.
And the same return to you completely. I mean, we have our little niches where it's like, okay, I'm helping couples, or I'm helping overweight people who are ADHD. That's only the gateway.
100%. So what I'm realizing is in this conversation, you know, we talked about like childhood trauma, and we talked about energy and healing and past lives and all of this. And you know, what I have found in my work is the gateway is there's somebody who wants to lose weight and their brain is wired differently. So we can work with that. Um, and then underneath the surface, we're really getting to some of those deeper traumas and really using some energy healing tools to help people feel more complete on the inside. Um,
Because if they just lose the weight and they don't deal with all of that, it's going to come right back.
100%. And I will tell you this. Uh, One of the shamans that I've worked with in ceremony, I met him for the first time, and he took one look at me, and I was the same weight that I am now, but this was after I had lost 65 pounds. He took one look at me and he said, "You've lost the weight. Now lose the weight."
Mm-hmm.
Wow. He had no, there was no way he could have known I was overweight at one point, but he saw it. He saw it in my energy field.
Of course he did.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah. So I'm a big believer in that. Like whether it's relationships or losing weight, like that a lot of times is the surface level. That is just the portal. And if you're willing to walk through that and really heal what's at the surface, it's an opportunity to really go deep
Yeah.
and to heal those deeper wounds.
And if people with ADHD can realize that on their own without the help of something else that might come up, like you and I did, it's so much easier. It's more freeing for them because they can just do it out of their own minds.
Mhm.
Oh, and by the way, I don't think that they necessarily need any chemical substances to do any of this. I think that most of it comes through what we've been talking about already. The
Mhm.
awareness, the meditation, the deep thought uh, is so much more effective from what I've seen than any chemicals. The chemicals, they give you another mask.
Hmm. Yeah. Hmm. The chickens are agreeing.
Sorry, they
Well,
don't like it.
so I don't know about you. This feels complete to me in this moment, and maybe we can do a second round at some point.
Sure, I would love to do that. And the chickens agree. So it's time for us to move on and you know, uh, do what we need to do.
Okay.
So thank you, though. It has been a enormous pleasure speaking with you.
Absolutely, Lay. Thank you so much.
And we'll talk again soon.
We'll talk soon. Take care.
You too. Bye-bye.